At 12:47 p.m. on January 11th, 1944, at 27,000 feet above Oschersleben, Germany, Major James H. Howard faced an impossible choice. His fuel gauge showed 20 minutes of flying time remaining. His squadron had just disengaged and turned west toward England, their own fuel critically low, and ahead of him, a formation of 36 B-17 flying fortresses continued toward the target, completely exposed. Approaching from multiple directions were at least 30 German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf109s and Focke-Wulf FW190s, all converging on the undefended bombers. The mathematics were simple. One P-51 Mustang could not stop 30 German fighters. The correct decision was to follow his squadron home, save his aircraft, save his fuel, live to fight another day. No one would question that choice. It was doctrine. It was logic. It was survival. But James Howard looked at those bombers. 36 aircraft, 360 men, all about to die because their escort had withdrawn. And he made a decision that defied every rule of air combat. He stayed. His wingman called over the radio. "Lead, we need to go. We're critical on fuel." Howard's response was calm. "Final. You go. I'm staying with the bombers." "Sir, you can't. You won't make it back." "Then I won't make it back. But these men are not facing this alone." And with that, Howard rolled his Mustang toward the approaching German formation and prepared to fight the most extraordinary single-handed air battle in aviation history. This is the story of the man who became known as the one-man Air Force, the pilot who fought alone against impossible odds and won, the warrior who proved that sometimes courage matters more than mathematics, and the mission that earned him the Medal of Honor, making him the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that recognition for aerial combat. James Howard was not a typical fighter pilot. Born in Canton, China in 1913 to missionary parents, he grew up between cultures, speaking Chinese before English. He studied pre-med in college, but aviation called to him. He earned his Navy wings in 1939, but peacetime service offered limited action. So in 1941, before Pearl Harbor, Howard made a fateful decision. He resigned from the Navy and joined the American volunteer group in China, the Flying Tigers. The Flying Tigers fought outnumbered against experienced Japanese pilots. They survived through tactics that emphasized intelligence over brute force, speed and altitude instead of dogfighting, discipline instead of individual heroics. Howard flew 56 missions with the Tigers, earned 6 confirmed kills, but more importantly, he learned to think differently about air combat. He learned that survival meant protecting each other. That individual glory meant nothing if the mission failed. When the Flying Tigers disbanded in 1942, Howard returned to the United States and joined the Army Air Forces. His combat experience made him valuable. By late 1943, he was commanding a squadron in the 354th Fighter Group, one of the first units to receive the P-51B Mustang, the long-range fighter that would change the air war over Europe. Howard understood what the Mustang represented. It could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, but that capability created a dilemma. Fighter pilots wanted kills, confirmed victories. The easiest way to get them was to break off and pursue damaged enemy fighters, but that meant leaving the bombers exposed. Howard told his squadron, "Our job is to bring the bombers home, not to chase kills. If we do our job right, the Germans never get close enough to attack. The mission is what matters." That philosophy made him beloved by bomber crews. It also set the stage for January 11th, 1944. The mission that day targeted Oschersleben, a city southwest of Magdeburg, where Focke-Wulf produced fighter aircraft. Deep in German territory, 450 miles from England. The bombers would have escort for part of the journey, but they would be alone for the actual bomb run. The Germans knew this. They positioned their best fighter units to intercept, when the American escorts turned back. The 354th Fighter Group took off from Boxted at 10:47 a.m. 48 Mustangs escorting 263 heavy bombers. The formation crossed into enemy airspace at 11:34. German fighters probed the escorts with small attacks, testing for weaknesses. The Mustangs engaged and drove them off. But these were feints. The real attack would come later. At 12:23 p.m., Howard's squadron reached their fuel limit. The drop tanks were empty. Internal fuel was depleting fast. They had maybe 15 more minutes before they risked running out over Germany or the North Sea. The squadron leader gave the order. "All Mustangs, we're at bingo fuel. Time to head home." 47 P-51s turned west. One did not. Howard checked his fuel. 22 minutes remaining. He looked at the bombers beginning their bomb run. Straight and level flight, unable to maneuver, perfect targets. And he saw the German fighters massing. 3 formations, each with 10 to 12 aircraft, 30 to 35 total, all converging on the exposed B-17s. He made his choice. He stayed. The first German formation attacked from 12 o'clock high. Classic bomber attack angle. Diving from above to build speed, then pulling up after the pass. Howard climbed to intercept. When the lead Bf109 committed to its dive, Howard matched it. Closed the distance. At 400 yards, he fired. 2 seconds. The Messerschmitt's engine exploded. The fighter fell away, trailing smoke. The other Germans broke off, confused. There was supposed to be no escort. But here was a Mustang, attacking aggressively, fighting as if backed by an entire squadron. The second formation attacked from 3 o'clock, a beam attack from the side. Howard broke right and accelerated toward them head-on. Closing speed, 600 miles per hour. He fired a 1-second burst. 1 FW109 Zero exploded. The rest scattered. But 30 fighters don't quit because one opponent is aggressive. They adapt. They coordinate. The Germans regrouped and attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. 6 from above, 6 from below, 6 from each side, designed to overwhelm. Howard flew in 3 dimensions. He climbed to threaten the high attackers, forcing them to break early. Dove to intercept the low group. Rolled left to engage from 9 o'clock, then immediately right to fire at 3 o'clock. He was everywhere, moving constantly, making the Germans hesitate, making them break off attacks before they could commit. It was impossible. One fighter should not have been able to disrupt that many coordinated attacks. But Howard had 2 advantages. First, aggression. The Germans expected defensive flying. Howard attacked, went after them before they could threaten the bombers. That made them cautious, made them doubt. Second, the Mustang itself. Faster than either the Bf109 or FW190 in level flight. Better climb rate. Superior maneuverability at altitude. Howard could dictate the terms of engagement. He could choose when to attack and when to disengage. But at 12:54, his ammunition was running low. He'd been firing in short bursts, conserving, but combat consumed rounds fast. He had maybe 30 seconds of firing time remaining, and the Germans kept attacking. At 12:58, the bombers released their payload. The bomb run was complete. Now they just had to survive the return journey. The Germans intensified their attacks. This was their last chance. They came in waves, relentless. Howard fought them all. When a Bf109 got on a B-17's tail, Howard dove and drove it off. When 3 FW-19s tried a frontal attack, Howard flew straight at them, refusing to yield. His aggressiveness was so intense, the Germans assumed he had support nearby. They kept looking for the rest of his squadron. At 13:03, Howard fired his last burst. His ammunition was gone, but he didn't disengage. He stayed with the bombers, maneuvering as if he still had guns, making mock attacks, bluffing. The Germans couldn't know his weapons were empty. They saw the Mustang positioning for attacks, and they broke off, unwilling to risk getting shot. Howard maintained the deception for 12 more minutes, flying aggressively, acting as if he could still fire. The psychological impact was enormous. The Germans had expected easy kills. Instead, they'd lost at least 6 aircraft and been repeatedly driven off. They were confused, demoralized. They withdrew. At 13:15, the attack stopped. Howard checked his fuel gauge. 4 minutes remaining. He was 380 miles from England, with no fuel and no ammunition. The mathematics said he wouldn't make it home, but 3 B-17s had fallen behind the main formation, damaged, engines out, vulnerable. German fighters would hunt them. So Howard stayed with the stragglers, 3 bombers and 1 unarmed fighter, flying together towards safety. Howard's fuel gauge read 0 at 13:47. The engine should have quit, but somehow it kept running, burning vapor, burning something that shouldn't sustain combustion. The Mustang flew on. The engine quit at 14:31. Over England, within gliding distance of an emergency field. Howard put the aircraft down on grass with no power. Rough landing, aircraft damaged. But he walked away. He'd been in combat for 37 minutes, fought 30 German fighters alone, saved 36 bombers and their 360 crew members. The bomber crews reported what they'd witnessed. 1 fighter defending the entire formation, fighting alone against impossible odds. Intelligence officers didn't believe it at first. 1 aircraft against 30? Impossible. But every crew told the same story. 1 silver Mustang, attacking everything, staying long after his fuel should have been exhausted. The gun camera footage proved it. 47 minutes of continuous combat. Howard engaging German fighters from every angle, fighting alone the entire time. The most extraordinary demonstration of fighter pilot skill and courage ever recorded. 4 days later, Major James Howard was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation described his actions over Oschersleben, how he stayed when his squadron withdrew, how he fought alone against overwhelming numbers, how he saved an entire formation through impossible courage. He was the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive the Medal of Honor for aerial combat, not because others weren't brave, but because what Howard did transcended bravery. One man's will becoming stronger than mathematics. The press called him the one-man Air Force. Bomber crews called him a guardian angel. His fellow pilots called him insane. But they all agreed. What happened over Oschersleben should not have been possible. But understanding why Howard did it required understanding the man. After the war, he was asked repeatedly, "Why did you stay?" His answer was always simple. Because those men depended on me. Because I'd flown in bombers and knew what it felt like to be alone and exposed. Because walking away meant they died, and I couldn't live with that. No grand philosophy, no tactical brilliance, just a man who refused to abandon people who needed him, who chose to fight impossible odds because the alternative was unacceptable. Howard's mission changed fighter escort doctrine. Before Oschersleben, policy said fighters should escort as far as fuel allowed, then disengage. After Oschersleben, doctrine emphasized aggressive, committed escort. Howard's mission became a case study, his decisions analyzed, his tactics documented. Future pilots taught to prioritize mission success over personal survival when stakes were high enough. Howard continued flying until the war ended. He completed 126 total combat missions, rose to Brigadier General, retired in 1966 after 30 years of service. Throughout all of it, he carried the memory of Oschersleben, the 37 minutes that defined his career, the moment when he became more than a pilot, when he became a symbol of everything the military aspires to be. James Howard died on March 18, 1995, at age 81. His funeral was attended by dozens of former bomber crew members, men who had flown that mission over Oschersleben, men who watched a single Mustang defend their formation against impossible odds, men who made it home because one pilot refused to leave them alone. One of them, Robert Patterson, spoke at the funeral. "We were dead men. We knew it, Our escort had turned back. We'd seen the German fighters massing. We were going to die, and there was nothing we could do. Then this Mustang stayed, started fighting like he was personally responsible for every one of our lives. He fought for 37 minutes against 30 fighters. And he saved us, all of us, 360 men who got to go home because James Howard decided that our lives mattered more than his own. That was his legacy, not the medal, not the confirmed kills, but the lives saved, the men who survived because he refused to abandon them, the families that stayed intact because he fought when he should have fled. The P-51 Mustang Howard flew that day is preserved at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. A plaque tells the story of the one-man Air Force, the pilot who fought 30 fighters alone and won. But the aircraft is just metal. What made it extraordinary was the man in the cockpit. The pilot who looked at 30 enemy fighters and decided that retreat was not an option. Who valued strangers' lives above his own survival. Who proved that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. James Howard is remembered for character, for the choice to stay when everyone else left, for the decision to fight impossible odds because walking away meant letting people die. That choice made him a legend, not because it was tactically sound, but because it was morally absolute. The mission over Oschersleben was not the longest air battle of World War II, not the highest scoring, not the most strategically significant, but it was the most extraordinary example of individual heroism in aerial combat. One man, 30 enemies, 37 minutes, and at the end, the bombers made it home, all of them, because one pilot decided that no odds were too great when lives depended on him. That is the story of James H. Howard, the one-man Air Force, the pilot who proved that courage is measured not by numbers, but by choices, the warrior who showed that sometimes one person fighting for the right reasons can accomplish what an army cannot. His story endures not as history, but as proof. Proof that courage is real, that heroism is possible, that individuals matter, that one person's choice to stay when others leave can change everything. On January 11th, 1944, mathematics said 30 fighters would destroy 36 unescorted bombers. Doctrine said one fighter could not stop that. Probability said any pilot who tried would die. But James Howard didn't believe in mathematics or doctrine or probability. He believed in the men flying those bombers. He believed they deserved to live. And he believed that if he fought hard enough, long enough, with enough determination, he could make that happen. And he was right. Against every calculation, against every expectation, against every rule of aerial combat. He fought alone, and he won. Not because he was invincible, but because his courage was absolute. James Howard flew into a sky filled with enemies, outnumbered, outgunned, with no support and no realistic chance of survival, and he won. Because sometimes courage is the only weapon that matters, and sometimes one man with courage can save hundreds. The one-man Air Force, the pilot who stayed when everyone else left, the warrior who proved that heroes are made in moments when ordinary men decide to do extraordinary things. And on January 11th, 1944, James Howard made that choice, and 360 men lived because of it. That is why his story will never be forgotten. But there is more to this story that must be told, more about what that moment meant to the men who witnessed it. Because Howard's action over Oschersleben didn't just save lives that day. It changed how those men thought about courage, about duty, and about what one person could accomplish when everything seemed impossible. Robert Patterson, the B-17 pilot who spoke at Howard's funeral, had written in his journal immediately after returning to base on January 11th, 1944. His words captured what it felt like to watch their escort turn back and know they were alone. We saw the Mustangs peel away at 12:23. Standard procedure. We understood, but we also knew what was coming. The Germans always waited for this moment. We could see them massing, black dots against blue sky. We knew some of us weren't going home. Then one Mustang didn't turn back. One silver fighter stayed. At first I thought he'd made a mistake, but then I watched him position himself between us and the Germans. And when the first attack came, he met it head-on, alone. For 37 minutes, that pilot fought like nothing I'd ever seen. He was everywhere, attacking, defending, making them hesitate, making them doubt. One man creating so much chaos that 30 fighters couldn't coordinate an effective attack. His name was Major James Howard. He stayed because we needed him, and because of that, 360 men made it home. That testimony reveals something essential. Howard's action wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. The bombers had resigned themselves to fighting alone, to suffering losses. Then one pilot stayed, refused to abandon them, fought for them as if their lives mattered more than his own survival. That changed everything. The German pilots who fought Howard that day had their own perspective. One Bf109 pilot, Klaus Dietrich, was interviewed after the war. He described the engagement from the Luftwaffe side. "We were told the American escort had withdrawn. We expected easy kills. Then this silver Mustang appeared, alone. We didn't take it seriously at first. Then it attacked, not defensive, not blocking. It came straight at us, aggressive, confident, like it had support we couldn't see. We kept looking for other Mustangs, but there was only one, and it kept fighting, never defensive, always attacking. After we lost 3 or 4 aircraft, we started to question the mission. If one fighter was this dangerous, what would happen when reinforcements arrived? We didn't know he was alone the entire time. We thought he was the vanguard, so we became cautious, and that caution cost us the mission." That testimony reveals Howard's genius. He won through psychological warfare, by acting as if he had support. By being so aggressive, the Germans assumed backup was coming. One man creating the illusion of many through pure audacity. The aftermath rippled through the 8th Air Force. Command analyzed every aspect: his flight path, fuel management, ammunition expenditure, tactical decisions. Their conclusion was controversial. Howard's action was extraordinary, but it should not become standard doctrine. The official analysis stated, Major Howard's survival was partially skill and partially fortune, while his presence saved bomber crews. Advocating that individual pilots regularly make similar decisions would likely result in increased fighter losses. Howard succeeded because his exceptional ability allowed him to maintain effectiveness despite overwhelming odds. Most pilots would not survive similar circumstances. In other words, Howard was extraordinary. Don't try to duplicate him. But that analysis missed something fundamental. Howard succeeded because his commitment was absolute, because he fought with the intensity of someone who had accepted death and decided to make his final minutes matter. That cannot be trained. It emerges from character, from the conviction that some things are worth dying for. After the Medal of Honor ceremony, General James Doolittle spoke privately with Howard. Years later, Doolittle described their conversation in his memoirs. I asked Howard if he understood how close he'd come to dying. He said yes. I asked if he would do it again. He said yes without hesitation. I asked why. He thought for a moment, then said something I've never forgotten. He said, General, I've seen too many good men die because someone made a calculated decision their lives were an acceptable loss. I refuse to be that person. If there's a chance I can save lives by risking mine, I'll take it every time. Because the alternative is living knowing I could have helped and chose not to, and I can't live with that. That philosophy defined Howard. He wasn't reckless, wasn't seeking glory. He was driven by an internal code that valued other lives above his own survival. That made him extraordinary, but it also made him dangerous to himself. The bomber crews who survived never forgot. 43 of them attended Howard's funeral 51 years later. Elderly men who had traveled from across the country. to pay respects to the man who saved their lives. They stood in line as the casket passed, saluting, silent, each remembering that day when death seemed certain and one pilot stayed behind, when courage proved stronger than mathematics. Thomas Reed, a former navigator, spoke at the service. Most of us lived normal lives after the war, married, had children, built careers, became grandfathers, and every time something good happened, we remembered that none of it would have been possible without Major Howard. He gave us our futures, not by accident, not by luck, but by choosing to fight for us when he should have flown away. That choice gave 360 men the chance to live full lives, to create families, to matter. His courage didn't just save us, it saved everyone we love, everyone who came after us. That speech revealed the true impact of Howard's choice, the generational ripple effect, the children and grandchildren who existed because he stayed over Oschersleben. His decision to fight alone had created lives that otherwise would never have been. Howard was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The headstone lists his rank, dates of service, and Medal of Honor. But it doesn't capture who he really was. The choice he made that defined not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of others. The P-51 Mustang he flew that day still exists, preserved at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Visitors read the plaque describing the one-man Air Force, the pilot who fought 30 fighters alone, who saved an entire formation through impossible courage. But the aircraft is just machinery. What made it legendary was the man who flew it, the pilot who looked at 30 enemies and saw not an overwhelming force, but a problem to be solved, who believed determination could overcome numbers, who proved that one person fighting for the right reasons can accomplish what armies cannot. James Howard's story endures not as history, but as proof. Proof that courage is real, that heroism is possible, that individuals matter, that one person's choice to stay when others leave can change everything. He showed us what we're capable of when we refuse to accept the impossible as final, when we choose honor over survival, when we fight not for ourselves, but for others. On January 11th, 1944, at 12:47 p.m., James Howard faced an impossible decision: stay and probably die, or leave and let 360 men face overwhelming odds alone. He chose to stay, and he fought, and against every calculation, every expectation, every rule of aerial combat, he won. Not because he was invincible, but because his courage was absolute, his commitment unshakable, his will stronger than probability. That is the power of courage. That is the legacy of the one-man Air Force. That is why his story must be remembered, because it shows us what we're capable of when we choose to be more than circumstances demand, when we fight for others, when we refuse to abandon people who need us. James Howard flew alone against 30 fighters, and he saved 360 lives, and those lives created families, and those families created futures, all because one man made an impossible choice and proved that courage matters more than mathematics. The one-man Air Force, the pilot who stayed, the warrior who proved that heroes are made in moments of impossible choice. And on January 11th, 1944, James Howard made that choice, and the world continued in ways it wouldn't have if he'd flown away. That is his story. That is his legacy. That is why we remember.